She looked into his eyes and felt her heart stop. Not because he was handsome or charming or anything she could explain, but because somewhere deep inside, in a place that existed before memory and beyond logic, she recognized him, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd loved him before, in another time, in another body, in another life. The hypnotherapist's voice was distant now, like an echo reaching her from across a vast space. Rachel felt herself sinking deeper into the chair, her body becoming heavy, her mind becoming light. The office around her faded, the sounds of traffic outside disappeared. Even the feeling of the cushions beneath her dissolved into something softer, something that felt more like floating than sitting. And then she felt it. A pulling sensation, gentle but insistent, like a current carrying her backward through time. Not just years, but centuries. Not just into her own past, but into something older, something that existed before Rachel, before this life, before this body. The air changed. It smelled different here. Wood smoke and bread baking and something earthy like rain on dirt roads. She could hear sounds that didn't belong to the modern world. Horse hooves on cobblestones. Voices speaking in rhythms that felt foreign but somehow familiar. The creak of wooden carts and the splash of water being poured from buckets. Her feet touched solid ground. She looked down and saw different shoes. Simple leather, worn and scuffed. Not her shoes. These belonged to someone else. Someone she used to be. Rachel had come to Dr. Susan Harper's office because of a feeling she couldn't shake. 3 months ago, she'd met someone at a coffee shop. His name was Daniel. They'd both reached for the same book on a shelf. Their hands had touched, and something had shifted in Rachel's entire reality. It wasn't attraction exactly, though she was attracted to him. It wasn't recognition in the normal sense, since she'd never seen him before in this lifetime. It was something deeper, more profound, more unsettling. When she looked at him, when their eyes met for the first time, she felt a wave of emotion so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Love mixed with grief, mixed with longing, mixed with relief. Like finding something precious that she'd lost and thought was gone forever. They'd started dating immediately. The connection was undeniable, magnetic, impossible to resist. But with the connection came these strange moments. Times when Daniel would say something or move a certain way and Rachel would feel like she'd seen it before. Not déjà vu exactly, more like memory. Memory of moments that hadn't happened in this life. And there were the dreams. Almost every night since they'd met, Rachel had been having vivid dreams, set in different time periods. Sometimes she was in medieval Europe, sometimes in ancient Asia, sometimes in places and times she couldn't identify. And in every dream, Daniel was there. Different faces, different names, different circumstances, but always him, always them, always finding each other. The dreams felt more real than dreams should feel. They had weight and texture and emotional depth that stayed with her long after she woke up. She'd tried to dismiss them as just her subconscious processing her feelings for Daniel, but something told her they were more than that. Something told her they were memories. So she'd found Dr. Harper, who specialized in past life regression, and decided to explore what was really happening. Was this just intense chemistry and an overactive imagination? Or was there something deeper going on? Had she and Daniel actually known each other before? Had they loved each other across multiple lifetimes? Now, standing in this other time, this other place, wearing shoes that weren't hers, Rachel felt her question being answered. Yes, they had known each other before, and she was about to remember how. Rachel's awareness settled fully into this other body, this other life. Her name was Catherine. She was 19 years old. The year was 1847, and she lived in a small village in the south of France, near the coast where the Mediterranean Sea sparkled blue under endless summer skies. Catherine's family owned a bakery. Her father was the baker, her mother managed the shop, and Catherine helped with both. She'd grown up surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the warmth of ovens, learning the rhythms of rising dough and the precise temperatures needed for perfect crusts. It was a simple life, but a good one. The village was small, maybe 300 people, and everyone knew everyone. Life moved slowly here, governed by the seasons and the harvests, by the church calendar and the tides. Catherine had been expected to marry young, as all girls in the village did. There were a few suitable young men, sons of shopkeepers and farmers who would provide stable lives. Her parents had been pushing her toward Henry, the blacksmith's son, who was hardworking and respectable, if a bit dull. But then Thomas had arrived. He came from Paris, sent by his family to recover from an illness. The sea air was supposed to be good for the lungs, they said. He was 22, studying to be a doctor, and he had the most beautiful eyes Catherine had ever seen, dark and deep and full of intelligence and kindness. He'd come into the bakery one morning, asking for bread in accented French that marked him as educated as from somewhere else, somewhere bigger and more exciting than this small village. And when their eyes met across the counter, Catherine had felt something shift in her chest, a recognition, a knowing, a sense that her life had just changed in a fundamental way. Thomas felt it too. She could see it in the way his expression changed, in the way he fumbled with his coins, in the way he came back to the bakery every single day after that, always buying more bread than one person could possibly eat. They began talking, short conversations at first, careful and polite, but gradually, the conversations grew longer, deeper. He told her about Paris, about his studies, about his dreams of becoming a doctor who could help people regardless of their ability to pay. She told him about the village, about her love of the sea, about her secret desire to learn to read better, to understand the world beyond what she'd been taught. Thomas started bringing her books. Simple ones at first, stories and poems she could read slowly with his help. They would meet in secret, at a small cove down the coast where the rocks formed a natural shelter. There, away from the village's watchful eyes, they would read together, talk for hours, and gradually, inevitably, fall in love. Rachel experienced all of this through Catherine's consciousness, feeling the intensity of first love amplified by the restrictions of the time period. Every stolen moment felt precious. Every touch of hands felt significant. Every shared glance across the bakery counter carried the weight of everything they couldn't say in public, because their love was impossible. Thomas was from a wealthy Parisian family. Catherine was a village baker's daughter. The social divide between them was vast and unbridgeable. His family would never approve of the match, and even if they did, her family couldn't provide a dowry worthy of a doctor from Paris. They both knew it. They talked about it during their secret meetings, trying to figure out a way forward, some path that would allow them to be together. Thomas suggested they could run away, go to America where class distinctions mattered less. Catherine worried about leaving her family, about the shame it would bring them, about surviving in a foreign land with no connections or resources. Summer turned to fall, and Thomas's health improved. Word came from his family that he needed to return to Paris to resume his studies. The date was set. 2 weeks. Catherine felt like her world was ending. She'd known from the beginning that this couldn't last. But knowing something intellectually and facing it emotionally were entirely different things. The thought of watching Thomas leave, of going back to her ordinary life, of possibly marrying Henry the blacksmith's son while her heart belonged to someone else, was unbearable. On Thomas's last night in the village, they met at their cove one final time. The moon was full, reflecting off the water, turning the sea silver. They held each other and cried and made promises they didn't know if they could keep. Thomas promised he would come back for her. He would finish his studies, establish himself as a doctor, save enough money to provide for her, and then he would return and marry her properly. It would take time, maybe 2 years, maybe 3, but he would come back. Catherine promised she would wait. She wouldn't marry anyone else. She would hold on to their love no matter how long it took, no matter how much pressure her family put on her. They sealed their promises with kisses that tasted like salt water and tears, with touches that tried to memorize every detail for the lonely time ahead, with words that held more weight than any legal contract. And then Thomas left. Catherine watched his carriage disappear down the coastal road, taking her heart with it. She returned to the bakery, to her ordinary life, but everything felt hollow now. The colors seemed duller. The bread didn't smell as sweet. The days stretched endlessly without purpose or joy. Her parents noticed the change and increased their pressure for her to marry Henry. She resisted, making excuses, delaying. She was waiting. Thomas would come back. He'd promised. Months passed. Catherine received one letter, delivered by a traveling merchant. Thomas was back in Paris, working hard on his studies, thinking of her constantly, missing her desperately. The letter was precious to her. She kept it hidden in her room, would take it out at night and read it by candlelight until she had every word memorized. But after that first letter, there was silence. No more messages came. Catherine told herself the postal system was unreliable, that Thomas was too busy with his studies to write, that everything was fine. But doubt began to creep in. What if he'd forgotten her? What if he'd met someone more suitable in Paris? What if the promises they'd made under the full moon had been just beautiful lies? A year passed, then another. Catherine turned 21, then 22. Her parents' patience ran out. They arranged her engagement to Henry without consulting her. The wedding date was set. Catherine felt numb. She'd waited like she'd promised, but Thomas hadn't come back. Maybe he'd never intended to. Maybe their love, which had felt so real and so powerful, had been just a summer romance to him, a brief distraction from his real life. On the night before her wedding to Henry, Catherine walked to the cove where she and Thomas had spent so many hours together. She sat on the rocks and looked out at the sea and allowed herself to finally grieve. To grieve the loss of her first love, the death of her dreams, the end of the future she'd imagined. And then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see her father or brother come to fetch her home, but instead, she saw Thomas. He looked different, thinner, more worn, as if he'd been through some ordeal. His clothes were dusty from travel. His face was shadowed with exhaustion. But his eyes, those beautiful dark eyes, held the same love they'd always held. "I'm sorry," were his first words. "I'm so sorry it took me this long. My father died. There were debts, legal problems. I couldn't leave until everything was settled. I sent letters, but I don't know if they reached you. I came as soon as I could. I'm here now. I came back for you like I promised." Catherine couldn't speak, couldn't move. 2 years of grief and doubt and resignation crashed into overwhelming relief and joy. He'd come back. He'd kept his promise. He still loved her. She ran to him, and they held each other like drowning people holding on to life. She was crying. He was crying. Both of them trying to talk at once. Trying to explain. Trying to apologize. Trying to make up for all the lost time. And then Catherine remembered. Her wedding to Henry was tomorrow. The arrangements were made. The families had agreed. The church was prepared. She'd resigned herself to going through with it because what choice did she have? But now Thomas was here. And everything was different, and she had to make a choice. Stay and marry Henry, as expected. Live a safe and acceptable life, never knowing what might have been with Thomas. Or go with Thomas. Leave everything behind. Face her family's disappointment and the village's judgment. Risk everything for love. Rachel felt Catherine's heart racing, felt the weight of the decision. This was the moment. This was the choice that would define everything. Catherine chose love. She told Thomas about the wedding, about the impossible situation, and together, they made a plan. They would leave that night, before dawn, before anyone could stop them. They would go to Paris first, then eventually to America, where they could start fresh without the weight of family expectations and class divisions. They returned to the village separately. Catherine went home and quietly packed a small bag with her few possessions. She wrote a letter to her parents, trying to explain, trying to apologize, trying to make them understand. She left it on her bed where they would find it in the morning. At midnight, she slipped out of the house. Thomas was waiting with a hired carriage at the edge of the village. She climbed in. He held her close, and they disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind everything they'd known for a future they would build together. Rachel experienced the exhilaration of that escape, the terror and excitement mixed together, and she experienced what came after, the years Catherine and Thomas spent together. First in Paris, where he finished his medical studies and she learned to read and write properly, to speak with confidence, to navigate a bigger world. Then their journey to America, to New York, where Thomas opened a small medical practice that served the poor, where Catherine worked beside him, learning medicine herself, becoming a healer. Even though women weren't officially allowed to be doctors, they built a life together, had 3 children, grew old side by side. It wasn't always easy. Money was often tight. The work was hard. They faced discrimination as immigrants, as people who had rejected social conventions. But through it all, they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. Rachel saw Catherine's death, at age 73, lying in bed with Thomas holding her hand. Their children and grandchildren were there. A life well lived. A love well loved. And Catherine's last conscious thought was gratitude. Gratitude that she'd been brave enough to choose love over safety, that she'd trusted her heart over social expectations, that she'd spent her life with the person her soul recognized as home. But that wasn't the only lifetime. As Catherine's consciousness faded, Rachel felt herself being pulled backward again, to another time, another place, another version of herself and Daniel. This time, she was a man named Wei, living in China during the Song dynasty. Around 1100 AD, he was a scholar, studying for the imperial examinations, hoping to become a government official. And there was a woman named May, the daughter of his teacher, who he fell in love with, despite the fact that she was promised to another man. A wealthy merchant who could advance her family's position. Wei and May's love was quiet and constrained, expressed through poetry and subtle glances. They could never be together openly. Social rules were even stricter here than in Catherine's France. But they loved each other deeply, completely, hopelessly. Wei never married. He passed his examinations, became a minor official, and spent his life writing poems about lost love and impossible longing. May married the merchant and had a comfortable but loveless life. They saw each other occasionally at formal gatherings, and the pain of being so close yet unable to touch, unable to speak their truth, was exquisite. They never consummated their love in that lifetime, never even kissed. But the connection was as real and as deep as any physical relationship, and when Wei died, alone in his government quarters at age 56, his last thought was of May, always May. Rachel was pulled through more lifetimes. She was a woman in ancient Rome, a slave in a wealthy household, who fell in love with a gladiator. Their relationship was brief and intense, ending when he was killed in the arena and she was sold to a different household. She was a Native American woman in the 1600s, whose tribe was being pushed west by European settlers. She loved a man from her tribe, a warrior and hunter. They had 2 children together before disease brought by the settlers killed her and half her tribe. He survived, raising their children alone, carrying the grief of her loss for the rest of his life. She was a nurse in World War I, working in a field hospital in France. She fell in love with a doctor, and they worked side by side saving lives amid the horror of war. They planned to marry after the war ended, but he was killed in a bombing raid on the hospital 3 months before the armistice. She survived, physically, but something in her died with him. Lifetime after lifetime, different circumstances, different obstacles, different outcomes, but always the same souls, always finding each other, always loving each other, and always facing some barrier that prevented them from having a full, complete life together. Rachel's consciousness hovered in a space between lifetimes, able to perceive all of them at once. She saw the pattern clearly now. She and Daniel, or whoever they'd been in each lifetime, were soulmates in the truest sense, not in the romantic comedy sense where soulmates meant perfect compatibility and easy happiness, but in the deeper sense where certain souls are connected across time, bound together by love that transcends individual lifetimes. But their pattern had been one of separation and loss. In almost every lifetime, they'd found each other only to be torn apart by circumstances. Death, social constraints, war, disease, obligations to others. Something always prevented them from having the full relationship their souls craved. And Rachel understood now why this lifetime, her current life with Daniel, felt so intense, so urgent, so precious, because her soul remembered all those other lifetimes, remembered all the times they'd been separated, remembered all the unfinished business, all the unlived potential, all the love that had been cut short. This lifetime was different. There were no wars separating them, no rigid social classes preventing their union, no arranged marriages or family obligations standing in their way. They'd both been born in a time and place where they were free to choose each other, free to build a life together without the barriers that had prevented them in the past. This was their chance. Maybe their first real chance across all these lifetimes, and her soul knew it, even if her conscious mind hadn't understood until now. But Rachel also saw something else in that space between lifetimes, a presence, a guide, or perhaps just a deeper part of her own consciousness, and that presence showed her why the pattern had existed. The separations weren't punishments, they weren't bad karma or cosmic cruelty, they were learning experiences. Each lifetime where she and Daniel had loved and lost had taught them something essential: patience, resilience, the ability to love without possession, the understanding that love transcends physical circumstances, the wisdom to choose love even when it comes with pain, because the alternative, not loving at all, is worse. All those lifetimes had been preparing them for this one, building their capacity to handle a full, complete, lasting relationship, developing the emotional and spiritual muscles needed to sustain real partnership across decades, teaching them to value what they had, to not take each other for granted, to appreciate every moment because their souls knew how rare and precious this opportunity was. The presence communicated one final message to Rachel. This lifetime, you have the chance to complete the pattern, to break the cycle of separation and loss, to finally experience the full expression of the love you've carried across centuries. But it's not guaranteed. You have to choose it. You have to work for it. You have to be brave enough to commit completely, to be vulnerable, to trust that this time will be different. The choice is yours. Will you let fear or doubt or the memory of past losses hold you back? Or will you embrace this opportunity with full awareness of what it means, what it costs, what it offers? Rachel felt herself making the choice not with words but with her entire being. Yes, she would choose love, would choose Daniel, would choose to trust that this lifetime could be different, could be the one where they finally got to stay together, to build a complete life, to experience the full depth and duration of their soul connection. And in that moment of choice, something shifted. The pattern broke. Or rather, it completed. All those lifetimes of separation and loss had been leading to this moment, this decision, this conscious commitment to staying and building and loving fully. Rachel opened her eyes in Dr. Harper's office with tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling, actually laughing through the tears, because everything made sense now. The instant recognition when she met Daniel, the intense emotions, the feeling that she'd known him forever. She had known him forever, across lifetimes, across centuries, across impossible distances and circumstances. Dr. Harper sat quietly, witnessing Rachel's processing, giving her space to integrate the experience. The therapist had facilitated many past life regressions involving soulmates, but each one was unique and sacred. "Do you want to talk about what you experienced?" Dr. Harper asked gently. Rachel tried to find words, but they felt inadequate. "How do you describe seeing multiple lifetimes at once? How do you capture the feeling of recognizing a love that's older than your current body? How do you express the profound relief and joy of understanding that the connection you feel is uncrazy or imaginary but based on real history that spans centuries?" She did her best, and Dr. Harper listened with the deep attention of someone who understood that what she was hearing was transformation happening in real time. "How do you feel about your relationship with Daniel now?" the therapist asked. Rachel thought about that. "I feel less afraid," she said finally. "I've been holding back, keeping part of myself protected because relationships always end, people always leave, love always hurts. But now I understand that those fears come from other lifetimes, from patterns that don't have to repeat. This lifetime is different. We have the chance to actually make it work." She paused, then added, "I also feel grateful for all those other lifetimes, even the painful ones, because they taught us how to love, they prepared us for this. And now we get to use everything we learned." In the days after the regression, Rachel felt different, lighter, more certain. She told Daniel about the session, about what she'd seen and experienced. She half expected him to think she was crazy, to dismiss it as fantasy or overactive imagination. But instead, his eyes filled with tears. "I've been having dreams too," he admitted, "of us in different times, different places. I didn't know what they meant. I thought maybe I was just romanticizing our relationship. But what if they're memories too? What if my soul remembers even if I haven't done regression?" They decided Daniel should also do regression therapy, to see if his memories matched hers, to confirm that this wasn't just Rachel's imagination. When he did, with Dr. Harper's guidance, he accessed several of the same lifetimes Rachel had seen. Not all of them, and from his perspective, rather than hers, but enough to confirm that they were both accessing genuine shared history. The confirmation changed everything. Their relationship deepened in ways neither of them had thought possible. The intensity made sense now. The feeling that they'd known each other forever was validated. The sense of urgency, of preciousness, of not wanting to waste a single moment together had context. But it also brought challenges. With the awareness of their pattern came the fear that it might repeat. What if something happened to separate them in this lifetime too? What if the pattern was too strong to break? What if they were destined to always find each other and always lose each other? Rachel brought these fears to her next session with Dr. Harper. The therapist nodded, understanding. "This is common when people remember past life connections. The old patterns create fear. But here's what you need to understand. The pattern only has power if you're unconscious of it. Now that you're aware, now that you've seen it clearly, you can make different choices." "How?" Rachel asked. "By not letting fear drive your decisions. By choosing to trust and commit even when it's scary. by communicating openly about your needs and fears instead of protecting yourself through distance, by treating each day together as a gift rather than something you're entitled to, by doing the work that long-term relationships require, instead of assuming that soulmate connection means everything will be easy. Dr. Harper leaned forward. Soulmates aren't about easy, they're about growth. You two have been growing together across lifetimes, and now you have the opportunity to grow together within a single lifetime. But growth requires effort, requires facing your shadows, requires choosing love over and over, even when it's hard. Are you willing to do that work? Rachel nodded. Yes, she was willing, and so was Daniel. They started couples therapy, not because anything was wrong, but because they wanted to build a strong foundation. They learned communication skills, conflict resolution strategies, how to maintain intimacy as relationships mature. They talked openly about their past life memories and what they meant for this current relationship. They also talked about commitment. Both of them had been avoiding the topic, cautious about moving too fast, despite the intensity of their connection. But now, with the awareness of how many lifetimes they'd been prevented from having a full relationship, they decided to stop holding back. Daniel proposed 6 months after Rachel's initial regression, not with a grand gesture but with simple honesty. I've loved you for lifetimes. I don't want to waste any more time. Will you marry me? Rachel said yes without hesitation. This was what they'd been working toward across centuries. This was the completion of a pattern that had been waiting to be completed. This was their chance. They got married in a small ceremony by the ocean, near a cove that reminded Rachel of the place where Catherine and Thomas had met in France. The vows they wrote included acknowledgement of their soul connection, their commitment not just for this lifetime but for all lifetimes to come. Standing there, holding hands, looking into each other's eyes, Rachel felt the presence of all their other selves. Catherine and Thomas, Wei and May, all the versions of them across all those lifetimes, witnessing this moment, celebrating this completion. The years that followed weren't perfect. No relationship is. They had disagreements and challenges and times when the work of maintaining intimacy felt exhausting. But they had something that made it all workable. They had perspective. They knew what they had was rare and precious. They'd experienced the alternative, the pain of separation and loss, enough times to appreciate what it meant to actually be together. They had 2 children, a daughter and a son. And sometimes, watching the kids play, Rachel would feel a sense of recognition. Had these souls been in their family before? Were they also part of the larger soul group that incarnated together across lifetimes? She didn't need to know for certain. The feeling was enough. Rachel also started writing about her experiences, not as fiction but as spiritual memoir. She wanted to share what she'd learned, to offer hope to people who felt like they'd met someone they'd known before, who experienced intense connections they couldn't explain. The book found an audience. Other people reached out, sharing their own stories of soulmate connections and past life memories. Rachel realized she and Daniel weren't unique. There were countless others who were also working to complete patterns, to heal old wounds, to finally experience the full expression of love that had been building across lifetimes. She started facilitating workshops where people could explore their own past life connections. Not everyone accessed specific memories the way she had, but many experienced profound shifts in how they understood their relationships. Seeing current struggles in the context of larger soul patterns made it easier to have patience, compassion, and commitment. Daniel also integrated his past life awareness into his work. He was a therapist specializing in trauma, and understanding that some trauma might carry across lifetimes opened new avenues for healing. He worked with clients who had inexplicable fears or patterns that did not seem to originate in their current childhood, helping them explore whether past life experiences might be relevant. Together, they built a life that honored both the practical demands of modern existence and the spiritual reality of their soul connection. They raised their kids, paid their mortgage, dealt with car repairs and parent-teacher conferences, and all the mundane details of daily life. But underneath all of that, they carried the awareness that they were ancient souls who had found each other again, who had finally broken the pattern of separation, who were completing something that had been waiting to be completed for centuries. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they returned to the ocean where they'd gotten married. They sat on the beach at sunset, holding hands, watching the waves. Rachel thought about Catherine and Thomas, about how they'd also grown old together, about how that lifetime had been the first time they'd managed to stay together for the long term. We're doing it, she said to Daniel. We're actually doing it. staying together, building a life, breaking the pattern. Daniel squeezed her hand. I never doubted we would, liar, Rachel said, smiling. You doubted plenty. So did I, but we chose to do it anyway. That's what matters. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, and Rachel felt the presence of their higher selves, the part of them that existed outside of time, witnessing all their lifetimes at once. That presence was proud of them, proud that they'd finally done what they'd set out to do so many lifetimes ago. They'd learned to love fully, to commit completely, to stay present and engaged even when it was hard. The pattern was complete, and in completing it, they'd created something new, a template for how soulmate relationships could work when both people were conscious, committed, and willing to do the work. They weren't just healing their own pattern. They were creating a new possibility for all the other soulmate pairs who were also trying to break cycles and build lasting love. Some souls find each other again and again across lifetimes, drawn together by love that doesn't end when the body dies. If you've met someone and felt that impossible recognition, that sense of knowing them from before, trust it. Your soul remembers even when your mind forgets. The question isn't whether the connection is real, it's what you'll do with it in this lifetime. Will you let old patterns repeat, or will you be brave enough to complete what you started so long ago? The choice, as always, is yours. Subscribe for more stories of souls who remembered what love really means.